I won a little over $2.4 million last spring, and my son still has no idea how close he came to changing his life forever. That probably sounds dramatic, maybe even cruel. But if you'd asked me a year ago whether I'd ever cut my own son out of the biggest financial decision of my life, I would have said no without even thinking about it. I would have told you family is family, blood is blood. That no matter how complicated things get, you don't use money to punish your children. Then I sent one text from a pharmacy parking lot, and in less than 3 hours, my son managed to confirm something I'd spent more than a decade trying not to admit. The money wasn't the reason I cut him off. That's the part people always get wrong. I didn't do it because I won the lottery and suddenly started acting like some rich old man testing everyone around him. I didn't do it because I was bored or bitter or looking for an excuse to hold power over my son. I did it because that one message forced me to stop lying to myself. It forced me to admit that my son didn't ignore me because he was overwhelmed or stressed or busy raising a family. He ignored me because, in that moment, there was nothing in it for him. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. My son's name is Daniel. He's 34 now, married, 2 kids, a decent job when he doesn't sabotage it, a house he never should have bought, and a very particular kind of charm that makes people excuse him longer than they should. Daniel isn't the kind of man who walks into a room and immediately sets off alarms. If anything, he does the opposite. He's funny, easy to talk to, great with his kids, the kind of guy who can show up to a family cookout with a cooler full of beer, put burgers on the grill, get everyone laughing, and leave looking like the warmest person there. That's part of why this took me so long to accept. If Daniel had been openly cruel, or obviously lazy, or the kind of son who never called unless he wanted something, I would have dealt with the truth years ago. But that's not how he works. Daniel gives you just enough to keep the hope alive. Just enough effort, just enough guilt. Just enough warmth to make you question your own instincts every time he lets you down. And he has one gift that has probably carried him further than any job ever has. He can make irresponsibility sound like bad luck. That's his real talent. He can take a mess he created with both hands and present it like life just unfairly happened to him. He can spend months making reckless choices, then sit across from you looking exhausted and ashamed, and somehow have you walking away feeling sorry for him. When he was 22, he dropped out of college after I'd already helped pay for part of it. The official reason was that he needed time to figure things out. The real reason was that he'd stopped showing up to classes, maxed out a couple credit cards trying to keep up a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and by the time he admitted any of it, he was almost $12,000 in debt. I paid it off. Not because I had to, not because anyone forced me, because he sat at my kitchen table with red eyes and a shaky voice telling me he'd made mistakes. He knew that, and he just needed one chance to reset before it ruined the rest of his life. I told myself everybody screws up once. Then when he was 26, he got behind on rent. By then he was married. His wife was pregnant with their first kid. He told me work had cut his hours, that he'd had a rough stretch, that they were trying to catch up, but everything had hit at once and now they were staring down the possibility of eviction. So I paid 3 months of rent. Not because I thought his explanation made perfect sense. It didn't. Even then, some part of me knew it didn't. But I looked at his wife sitting there with one hand over her stomach, and all I could think was that I wasn't going to let my grandchild come into the world in the middle of a financial disaster. Then came the transmission, then a dental bill, then daycare, then a temporary loan to cover a tax problem that somehow became permanent. Every single time, it was the same basic performance. Daniel would show up looking embarrassed enough to seem sincere. He'd say he hated asking. He'd say he knew how bad it looked. He'd promise this wasn't going to become a pattern, and then he'd hit me with some version of the same line. "Dad, I just need a little help getting back on my feet." And every time, I believed him. Or maybe believed is too generous. Maybe I wanted to believe him badly enough that the difference stopped mattering. Because when it's your child, hope makes you stupid. That's the truth nobody likes saying out loud. Hope makes you rewrite reality in real time. It makes you call selfishness stress. It makes you call irresponsibility bad timing. It makes you turn manipulation into vulnerability because the alternative is admitting you've spent years pouring love, money, time and emotional energy into someone who only really notices you when they need something. And I didn't want to admit that. Not about Daniel, especially not after his mother died. My wife Karen passed away when Daniel was 19. That matters, though maybe not for the reason people think. Karen was the center of our family. She remembered birthdays. She noticed when something was off before anyone said a word. She had this very specific way of handling Daniel that I never mastered. She could call him out without making him defensive. She could hear the lie under the excuse and still make him feel loved enough to tell the truth. I never had that balance. If I came down too hard, I was the villain. If I softened too much, Daniel walked right through me. Karen knew how to do both. She could cut through his nonsense and still make him feel safe. When she got sick, everything changed quickly. There was a period of maybe 6 weeks where we were still pretending it might be something manageable. Then came the scans, the specialist appointments, the careful voices, the sudden shift in how everyone looked at us. Daniel was technically still in college then, though "in college" was generous considering how little he was actually attending by that point. Emily, my oldest, was already married and living 2 states away with a newborn. So most of it fell on me, and Daniel drifted. I want to be fair here. He came to the hospital. He visited his mother. He cried at the funeral. He wasn't absent in the most obvious sense, but even in that season, there was a kind of distance in him that I didn't know how to name at the time. Like he was present just enough to avoid guilt, but never quite enough to carry any actual weight. After Karen died, he got worse. Or maybe he'd always been heading there, and I just lost the energy to pretend otherwise. Either way, I made a decision in those years that I thought was compassion and turned out to be weakness. I stopped expecting much from him. That sounds harmless when you say it quickly, maybe even loving. It wasn't. When you stop expecting much from someone, you don't just lower the pressure. You lower the standard, you start treating basic responsibility like a pleasant surprise, you become grateful for crumbs because you've trained yourself not to hope for a meal. That's what I did with Daniel. If he remembered my birthday, I thought, see, he cares. If he showed up to Thanksgiving on time, I thought, he's trying. If he paid back even a small piece of what he owed, I treated it like evidence of growth. Meanwhile, my daughter, Emily, was the complete opposite. Emily called just to ask how I was doing. She mailed photos of the kids without needing a reason. She remembered my cardiology appointments and texted that morning to ask if I wanted her to call afterward. She wasn't perfect, no one is. But with Emily, I never had to wonder whether she loved me. I only worried that she took too much on herself and didn't ask for help enough. And maybe that's another ugly truth in all of this. Daniel didn't become the center of so many rescues just because he was the needier child. He became the center because Emily never forced me to rescue her. She handled her life. Daniel made his life everybody else's emergency. And once a family gets locked into those roles, the responsible child and the unstable one, the helper and the helped, it's incredible how long everyone keeps playing them. The lottery happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April. I was at a gas station about 15 minutes from home. The kind of place where the coffee tastes like burnt plastic and the fluorescent lights make everyone look a little sick. I was paying for gas and a bottle of water when I saw the scratch tickets by the register. I don't even buy them, usually. Karen used to joke that the lottery is just a tax on people who are bad at math. But for some reason, I bought one. I scratched it at my kitchen table. At first I thought I was reading it wrong. Then I thought maybe I didn't understand the game. Then I checked the instructions, checked the numbers again, used the little app, and finally sat down because my knees stopped feeling reliable. After taxes, after all the serious conversations with lawyers and financial advisors who suddenly speak to you like you're handling a bomb, the number came out to just over $2.4 million. Not yacht money, not private island money, but enough. Enough to retire comfortably. Enough to stop worrying about every major repair. Enough to travel if I wanted. Enough to help my children in a meaningful way if I chose to. And that last part, if I chose to, is exactly why I kept my mouth shut. I told a lawyer, I told a financial advisor, and I told my oldest friend Ron because if I hadn't said the number out loud to somebody I trusted, I think I might have convinced myself it wasn't real. But I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Emily right away either, though she found out later for reasons that matter. The point is, I kept it quiet because I knew exactly what money does to unresolved family dynamics. It doesn't create them. It exposes them. It turns every old wound into a negotiation. And with Daniel, I already knew what the danger was. If he found out I had money before I answered one question, I'd never trust anything that came after. That question was simple. If I were genuinely in trouble, would my son show up for me? Not for an inheritance, not for access, not because there was something in it for him, for me. The medication story wasn't entirely fake. That's the part I still wrestle with. I really do take heart medication. I've had blood pressure issues for years, and a few years back, I had a scare serious enough to convince me I'm not indestructible, no matter how much yard work I do or how much I try to act like it. That week, there actually had been a problem with the refill. The prescription was ready, but the insurance claim was delayed, and the out-of-pocket cost was just under $500. I could have paid it myself 10 times over without blinking, but I sat in that pharmacy parking lot with the bag waiting inside and thought, this is it. The amount was small enough to be manageable. The reason was believable. The urgency was real enough that anyone who cared would understand it mattered. If Daniel wanted to prove me wrong, this was easy. Not fun, not convenient, but easy. So I texted him. I kept it simple. Hey, sorry to ask, but my insurance messed up my refill and I'm short $480 for my heart meds. Pharmacy closes at 6. Can you help me cover it and I'll sort it out tomorrow? I stared at the message for a few seconds before sending it. Then I hit send and set the phone down like it might bite me. Daniel read it in 12 minutes. I know that because the read receipt popped up while I was still sitting there. And then, nothing. No call. No what happened. No are you okay? No give me 10 minutes, let me see what I can move around. Nothing. At first, I did what I'd always done. I made excuses for him. Maybe he was driving, maybe he was in a meeting, maybe he saw it and was trying to figure out how to help before answering. Maybe. At 5:41, I sent one more message, need to know soon, they close in 20. That one stayed unread. At 5:56, I paid for the medication myself, walked out with the bag in my hand, sat back in the car, and felt something I still hate admitting. Not anger, embarrassment. Because there's something deeply humiliating about sitting alone in a CVS parking lot, waiting to find out whether your own son cares enough to answer a message about heart medication. It wasn't just that he hadn't helped. It was that I had to create the moment at all. That's what got to me. I drove home, put the medication in the cabinet, poured myself a glass of water, and spent the next 2 hours trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then at 8:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting maybe a late apology, maybe a panicked dad, I just saw this. Are you okay? Instead, I got this. Hey, random question. Any chance you could spot me $700 till Friday? We had an unexpected bill hit, and I'm short. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because some part of me still couldn't quite believe the timing. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't lost his phone. He hadn't been buried in some emergency of his own. He saw my message, ignored it, then came back when he needed something. I wish I could tell you I handled that moment with dignity. I didn't. I opened his wife's Instagram story like some bitter old man looking for evidence and found exactly what I was afraid I'd find. Cocktails at a restaurant downtown, shopping bags on the table. Daniel grinning next to his oldest kid while his wife captioned it with some little heart emoji about a back-to-school spree. Now, I'm not stupid. Kids need clothes. Families go out to dinner. Life doesn't stop because your father sends a text. But if your father says he needs help getting his heart medication before the pharmacy closes, and you can't even bother responding before you post cocktails and shopping bags and then ask him for $700, that isn't bad timing. That's a choice. I didn't answer him that night. Or the next morning. Around noon the following day, he sent another message. Everything okay? That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so transparent. He wasn't checking on me. He was checking on why I hadn't answered his request for money. I replied with one sentence. Got the medication. Appreciate the concern. A minute later, he sent back a thumbs up. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no sorry I missed your message, no glad you're okay. Just a yellow hand on a gray screen. And weirdly, that was the moment the anger burned off. What replaced it was clarity. For years, I'd been telling myself Daniel was a good son under pressure. A decent man stretched thin. A father doing his best with too much on his plate. That thumbs up ended the story I'd been telling myself. Because if you read, "I'm short on my heart medication," and your only response, once the situation is resolved, is a thumbs up, then this isn't about being busy. It's about not caring enough to engage unless there's something in it for you. For the next few weeks, I said nothing. I didn't reveal the lottery. I didn't confront him. I didn't send some wounded speech about disappointment and betrayal. I just watched. And once I started watching honestly, I noticed something I should have noticed years earlier. Every conversation with Daniel bent toward the same destination: money. The kids needed new school clothes. The daycare cost more than expected. His wife's car needed brakes. The mortgage had gone up because of taxes and insurance. The basement had a leak. A friend from work had a solid opportunity he wanted to get in on, but he needed a little capital. It was never direct at first. He was too practiced for that. He'd start with, "How have you been?" and then slowly steer the conversation toward whatever problem was eating his life that week until helping him felt like the natural conclusion. One Saturday, he called just to check in. We talked about the weather, my tomatoes, his daughter's soccer game. Then somehow, 10 minutes later, we were discussing how expensive a plumber was and whether I knew anyone who could do waterproofing cheaper. Another time he came by with coffee and spent half an hour talking about how stressed his wife had been, how hard it was to keep everything afloat, how one bad month could knock a family sideways. He never directly asked, not at first. He just laid the emotional groundwork. And every time I heard that pharmacy text in my head, "Any chance you could spot me $700 till Friday?" Then I made a mistake. I bought myself a truck. Nothing ridiculous, no sports car, no late-life crisis machine. Just a nice truck I'd wanted for years and could finally afford without needing to pretend it was irresponsible. I paid cash, parked it in the driveway, thought nothing of it. My sister noticed first, then my nephew. And because family gossip travels faster than common sense, Daniel heard about it within 2 days. He called me on a Sunday afternoon, sounding warmer than he had in months. "Dad, since when are you making secret truck purchases?" I laughed and told him I got a decent deal. He joked that I must be hiding something. I should have lied. Instead, I hesitated just a little too long. He heard it, and once Daniel smelled money, the temperature of our relationship changed overnight. The next week, he showed up at my house with coffee and donuts. We sat on the porch for almost an hour. He asked about my health, my retirement plans, whether I'd ever thought about traveling more, whether I'd considered moving somewhere warmer. All these thoughtful questions from the man who couldn't answer a text about heart medication. Then finally, with that fake, casual tone people use when they already know where the conversation is going, he said, "Aunt Lisa said you came into some money." There it was. I asked what she'd said. He shrugged. "Nothing specific, just that you got lucky on something." That was a lie. Daniel has never in his life heard the phrase, "came into some money," and decided not to ask follow-up questions. I told him I'd done well on an investment and left it there. He nodded, but I could practically hear him recalculating my value in real time. From that point on, he got warmer. That's the only word for it. More calls, more texts, more offers to come by and spend time. Suddenly, he wanted the kids to see Grandpa more often. Suddenly, he wanted to take me to lunch. Suddenly, he was talking about how important family is and how he knew we hadn't always been as close as we should have been. And if that had been all it was, maybe I could have convinced myself it was genuine. Maybe I would have wanted to. But then came the hints. The mortgage was getting tight. The basement leak was worse than they thought. His wife's hours had been cut. The oldest needed braces. He'd been losing sleep trying to hold everything together. Then one night at dinner, he leaned back in his chair, swirled the ice in his glass, and said almost like a joke, "If I ever got one real break, Dad, I swear I'd never waste it." A few days later, Emily called me. And this is where things got uglier. Emily almost never calls just to gossip. If she's calling with that particular tone in her voice, it means she's either worried or she's trying very hard not to be angry. She asked if Daniel had talked to me recently. I said yes. She was quiet for a second, then asked if I'd given him any money. I said no. Then she told me Daniel had called her 2 nights earlier, asking if she thought I'd be open to helping family right now. That was the phrase he used, helping family, as if he was talking about some noble collective effort and not his own bills. Emily said he'd been weirdly vague at first, then finally admitted he thought I'd gotten some kind of payout, or inheritance, or investment windfall, and that he wanted to know how much she knew. I asked what she told him. She said the truth, nothing. Then she said something that landed harder than I expected. She said, "Dad, I don't think he's worried about you. I think he's worried about missing his chance." That sentence sat with me for days, because Emily had always been gentler than I was when it came to Daniel, more patient, more willing to assume he meant well. So hearing that from her felt like a door closing. A week after that, Daniel invited me over for dinner. Not the whole family, just me. That alone was unusual enough to make me suspicious. When I got there, the house looked exactly like the kind of house people buy when they care more about how ownership feels than what ownership costs. Too much square footage, too much decorative nonsense, too much money tied up in rooms nobody actually needed. His wife was polite but tense. Daniel was overly cheerful. The kids were loud in the way kids should be. For about 20 minutes, it almost felt normal. Then his wife took the kids upstairs for baths. Daniel poured us both a drink, and suddenly we were alone at the kitchen island with all the small talk burned off. He stared into his glass for a second, sighed like a man carrying the world, and said they were behind on the mortgage. Not by one payment, by 3. Then he told me about the basement leak, the repair estimate, the credit cards, the adjustable rate mortgage they apparently thought was a good idea because the monthly payment looked manageable at the time. It was one bad decision stacked on top of another. Then came the number, $35,000. That's what he needed to catch up, fix the house, and stop drowning. He made sure to say he wasn't asking for a handout, just a loan, just help getting stable, just one break, same script, bigger number. I sat there listening to a 34-year-old man ask me to rescue him from a life built on top of years of previous rescues, and I realized I couldn't do it again without hating myself. So I asked him one question. "Do you remember the text I sent you from the pharmacy?" The change in his face was small, but I saw it. He knew exactly which text I meant. He leaned back, rubbed a hand over his jaw, and gave me the first line people use when they already know they're cornered. "Dad, are we really doing this?" Yes, we were really doing this. I reminded him exactly what I'd written: the insurance issue, the heart medication, the pharmacy closing, the amount, the fact that he read it, the fact that he ignored it, the fact that he texted hours later asking me for money of his own. And then the excuses started. He said he didn't know it was that serious. He said I always make things sound urgent. He said he figured I'd handle it because I always do. He said he meant to call later. He said he had his own family to think about. And then, when all of that didn't move me, he switched to outrage. "You tested me. That's messed up." I told him he was right. I had tested him, and I hated that I felt like I needed to. But I hated the answer more. Then he said the sentence that killed whatever was left of my patience. He looked me in the eye and said, "So because I missed one text, you're going to hold this over my head forever?" One text. That's how he framed it, as if the problem was one missed message and not a decade of only showing up when he needed something. As if the problem wasn't that I asked for help getting heart medication and he came back asking me for $700. As if the problem wasn't that the moment he thought I had money, he suddenly rediscovered what family means. I told him no, I wasn't holding one text over his head. I was finally letting one text mean what it should have meant the first time. Silence sat between us. Then Daniel softened his voice and tried one last angle. He said he was drowning. He said he knew he'd made mistakes. He said he was trying to hold his family together. He said he wasn't asking me to solve his whole life, just help him get stable. And for one stupid second, I almost caved. Because he's still my son. Because some part of me still sees the little boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with cartoons on and one shoe half off his foot. Because love doesn't evaporate just because clarity finally shows up. But then I remembered sitting in that pharmacy parking lot staring at my phone, hoping I was wrong about him. And I realized that if I gave him money now, I wouldn't be helping him. I'd be rewarding the exact behavior that got us here. I'd be teaching him that even this, Even ignoring his father's message about heart medication still wasn't enough to cost him anything, so I told him no. Not angrily, not dramatically, just no. Then I told him something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I said, "You already got your inheritance." He frowned and asked what the hell that meant. I told him it meant the credit card debt I paid off, the rent I covered, the transmission, the dental bill, the daycare bailout. The quiet cash I slipped him every time life got uncomfortable. The years of rescuing him before he ever had to face the consequences of being the kind of man who expects rescue as part of adulthood. That was his inheritance. Every bailout, every soft landing, every time I chose his comfort over the lesson he should have learned. He just stared at me. So I kept going. I told him I wasn't leaving my money to someone who could ignore "I need help getting my heart medication before the pharmacy closes" and still ask me for $700 that same night. I told him I wasn't financing another cycle of excuses. And then I told him the hardest truth in that room wasn't about him. It was about me. I said the worst part wasn't realizing what kind of man he'd become. It was realizing how long I'd helped him become it. That landed. You could see it. Not because he suddenly understood the emotional damage. I'm not naive enough to romanticize the moment. It landed because, for the first time, I think he understood the door was actually closed. He asked if that meant he was getting nothing. I said no. It meant he was getting nothing directly. The money wasn't disappearing. I set up a trust for my grandkids instead. For school, for emergencies, for medical bills, for the kind of help that actually changes a life when it's given with structure instead of guilt. Daniel couldn't touch it, couldn't borrow against it, couldn't manage it, couldn't invent a reason to dip into it early. If one of my grandkids needs tuition someday, it's there. If one of them has a medical emergency, it's there. If one of them grows up to be the kind of person who shows up when family is hurting instead of only when money is on the table, then good. Maybe something decent comes out of all this, after all. He sat there for a long time after I said that. Then he asked if I was serious. I said yes. He asked if there was anything he could do to fix it. And maybe that was the saddest part of the whole conversation, because for the first time in years, I think he was finally asking the right question. Just far too late. I told him there probably wasn't anything he could do for the money. For us, maybe, eventually. If he actually wanted a relationship that wasn't built around what I could provide. But that would take time, and it would have to happen without him treating every phone call like a pre-loan conversation. He left without yelling. No dramatic scene, no slammed door, no movie speech. Just this hollow, stunned look on his face like he'd walked into the wrong future. A few days later, Emily called again. She asked how it went. I told her. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm sorry, Dad. Not because I'd lost the money. Not because there was some big family fracture, but because I think she understood what it cost to finally admit the truth about someone you've spent years protecting in your own mind." That's the part people don't talk about. When you finally stop making excuses for someone you love, it doesn't feel powerful. It feels like grief. It feels like burying the version of them you kept hoping would eventually become real. We still speak, Daniel and I, birthdays, major holidays, the occasional stiff conversation about the kids. He's more polite now, more careful, sometimes even thoughtful in a way that feels almost sincere. Maybe losing access to the money woke him up. Maybe it didn't. Maybe he's just learned to hide the asking better. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. I didn't cut my son off because he wouldn't buy me medication. I cut him off because that moment forced me to stop lying to myself. It forced me to admit that love and obligation are not the same thing. That helping someone and enabling them are not the same thing. And that if a man can read a message from his father saying, "I need help getting my heart medication before the pharmacy closes," ignore it for hours, then text back asking for money of his own, the lottery didn't cost him his future. He did.